excited to be here today. Thank you all so much for coming. Let's jump in. We've got a lot to cover in this session. So first of all, I'd like to introduce myself. I'll be comparing this session. My name's Jessi. I'm the founder and CEO of Provenance. We are the software solution for sustainability communications. I'll give you a little bit of background on Provenance just to kick us off. So I founded Provenance out of a frustration for how little we know about the things we buy. I wanted something simple, which was just to know the impact of products and how those products impacted people and planet. And so, yeah, Provenance is working with technology to help unlock the facts about social and environmental impact. There's a couple of bits of the software I just wanted to highlight quickly before we dig into the session. Firstly, I know lots of you have already seen and been exploring the Provenance framework, which is a rule book of more than 50 impact claims covering climate, waste, nature, workers, and community. We've made this free and available for all brands to use as a kind of guidelines in order to help you make credible claims on the impact of your products. And then secondly, we've got the Provenance Toolkit, which enables brands to publish these claims and other kind of credible proof-backed sustainability content, both online and off-pack. And I'm excited to say we're currently working with around 100 beauty brands and retailers, which has been super exciting, having started out in the food industry. We really are seeing a significant moment arriving for the beauty industry, which is, according to a study by the British Beauty Council, 86% of beauty shoppers want information about the ingredients in the supply chain behind beauty products, and 90% want clearer information on things like how to recycle products packaging. So we're seeing a real moment where the shoppers at the end of the supply chain are demanding to know a lot more about the impact of products. And brands know that sustainability communications are crucial in today's market, but the reality is it's not always easy to get right. And we've seen many brands be a little bit scared of getting it wrong. So today's session is a great opportunity for beauty brands to dig in and understand a bit more about how you do get it right. And I'm very honoured to be joined today by two guests who couldn't be better placed to help our community of brands. So firstly, we've got Sarah Brown, who is the founder and CEO of Pai Skincare. She's the executive board member of CEW UK, which is a professional organisation that promotes the beauty industry. And I'm also joined by Cecilia Aranha, who is the Director of Consumer Protection at the UK's Competition and Markets Authority. Cecilia led the investigation into misleading environmental claims that resulted in the recently published Green Claims Code. So welcome both of you. It's so exciting to have you here today. So in terms of format for today's session, we're going to pick out three key principles from the CMA's Green Claims Code and have a really practical discussion about how beauty brands can put these into practice. So specifically, what does it mean when making organic claims, when talking about packaging recyclability, and finally around the communication of carbon. But first of all, let's get to know our guests a little bit better. Sarah, I'd love to start with you and hear a little bit more about the founding story of Pai and what made you start a beauty brand.
Thanks, Jessi, and thanks for inviting me on today. It's great to be here. It's a subject very dear to my heart. So Pai, for those of you who don't know us, was really born out of a very personal problem. So I had a condition, autoimmune skin condition, sort of onset very suddenly in my mid-20s. It's an idiopathic skin condition, which means of unknown cause. Spectacularly helpful when you're trying to solve it. But after a flurry of hospital appointments and things, I was given pills to pop and I was sent on my way. And many years ensued where I was trying to self-educate. And, you know, why is all of that relevant? Part of that education piece was around products. What could I use on my skin? I had hyperreactive skin. I was new to the beauty industry. I didn't understand it. I didn't know how to read an ingredients list. And it's hard as a consumer to navigate an ingredients list in beauty, I can tell you. And I think one of my big frustrations was that I just found myself missold to, mismarketed to continuously, whether it was around hypoallergenic, whether it was around all natural or organic. I also never had a right to return, separate issue, but a big one. And I think as an outsider looking in to this industry, I couldn't believe, because I know, big foodie, I love organic food. I couldn't understand how these loopholes were legal, but more than that, how freely accepted they were in the industry, how freely utilized, and there was almost this ambivalence to, well, everyone else does it, and the bandwagoning was just really astonishing. And really, the person left in the big loser here was the consumer, who was me at the time, a frustrated consumer who was in the dark all the time, and being duped every day. So that's what got me into this world, Jessi. And then I'm pleased to say it started from a position of real frustration, but it morphed into something a lot more positive. So what started as a problem became a complete passion, because I started to your point, what's in the bottle? I started to get into those ingredient lists, unpick them, work out what all the ingredients were. And I started to be fascinated by the natural remedial properties of plants. And so it just spun from there. Then I got drawn into the organic world and all of the ethical dimensions around that, and that's how it all began.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, I fully appreciate that early frustration in starting the company, and it's so fantastic to see what you've built with Pai. And yeah, I'm excited to kind of dig in and hear a bit more of it all looks very easy from the outside, right? You've built this absolutely amazing brand, incredible products, but I'm sure under the hood there's been lots of trials and tribulations and trade-offs. So can't wait to dig in and find in a bit more. Cecilia, let's jump over to you. I mean, we were absolutely overjoyed when the Competition and Markets Authority decided to crack down on misleading green claims. Certainly something, ending greenwash is absolutely core to our passion at Team Provenance and to so many of our community. Love to hear a little bit more on kind of the organisation and also kind of how this guidance came about.
Yeah, so I imagine a lot of people in the beauty industry aren't familiar with the Competition and Markets Authority. A lot of people in the wider world aren't familiar with this either. We kicked off in 2014 and we took over from the Office of Fair Trading. So we're now the leading organisation for enforcing consumer protection law and competition law in the UK, and we have a role to play in things like assessing mergers and investigating criminal cartels as well. The bit I work in is consumer protection, and we have a mission really to make sure that markets are working well for consumers. And so we will take on entire sectors, entire markets, and try to shift behaviour so that those markets are adopting pro-consumer practices. In terms of this guidance, I mean, it was also born out of a bit of personal frustration on my part. I've had an ongoing interest in issues around sustainable consumption, and I was generally frustrated with how much stuff there was in the world. And so I was sort of thinking about what could be done using consumer protection powers to really address issues of the way consumers are encouraged to buy too much stuff or to buy too much of the wrong stuff. And then we just end up with masses of waste of resources. And then in 2020, as part of the CMA's annual plan, we for the first time introduced a goal of using our powers to support the transition to a low carbon economy. When that was announced, we started to think about what projects we could undertake, and greenwashing then was an obvious one for us to pick up on. We decided to go down the guidance route then because it seemed to be such a widespread problem, and we were hearing not just about greenwashing but actually about green hushing and businesses not having the confidence to make visible the changes they were making. So we wanted to introduce the guidance then so that it would give the companies that were doing things wrong a bit of a steer and a bit of pause, but also to give confidence to other businesses to shout about what they're doing.
Absolutely. I mean, that's something we've seen firsthand at Provenance for sure. Like lots of shouting about what's going on and then the greenwash barriers. But yeah, it's amazing how there are so many businesses that just under the hood are getting on doing great stuff and actually aren't really talking about it, don't feel they've got the confidence to talk about it. So that's interesting. I do think this guidance can help with both sides of that puzzle. But for those that are hearing about the Green Claims Code for the first time, Cecilia, could you just give us a quick overview of what's the TLDR, like the key principles of the code?
Yeah, so we've got 6 principles in the code. The claims that are being made have to be truthful and accurate. They have to be clear and unambiguous. You can't omit or hide important information. If you're making comparisons either to previous versions of your own products or to other people's products, those comparisons have to be fair and meaningful. You have to consider the full life cycle of the product that you're selling or the service that you're offering, and any claims that are made have to be substantiated by robust evidence. So that's the nutshell guide.
Brilliant. I'm sure everyone's scribbling notes very quickly. So in terms of a format for this session, we're going to jump in. We're actually going to pick out 3 of the kind of key principles from the CMA's Green Claims Code, and we're going to get super practical looking at those 3. So first of all, we're going to start with principle 1, which is claims must be clear and unambiguous. So this is the first principle we're going to jump into. Cecilia, maybe you could just give us a little nutshell, like what does that encompass? And then we're going to jump in and talk a little bit practically about how that works, looking at organic as our claim of choice.
Yeah, so this is the idea that when you word your claims, you have to do so in a way that's transparent and that is straightforward. And the idea is that consumers should be able to easily understand what you're telling them. You shouldn't be presenting things in a way that confuses consumers or that gives the impression that your product is better for the environment than it really is. And one of the key things around this is the use of sort of vague or general statements about environmental benefits that are most likely to be misleading unless you happen to have a very high level of substantiation that your product is good for the environment in all circumstances. But that can be quite difficult to do. So that's the main thing, is to sort of avoid those vague and undefined terms.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So Sarah, you have been a long-standing champion of organic beauty. Just wondered if you could pick up for brands that may be a bit newer to the organic space. Yeah, what are kind of some of the key do's and don'ts in the organic beauty space?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first do would be kind of put your money where your mouth is and get certified. And I think people are quite fearful. I think particularly if you're a smaller brand starting out, which I was, that people consider the expense. It is actually very affordable, and the way the fees are structured are based on your income and revenues, so it's really fair. And I think the other thing that I would really drum home is that bodies like the Soil Association, Cosmos, EcoCert, and USDA, they really will help you, and particularly in the more opaque areas like using endangered plants, which you might not know. We certainly didn't. They can guide you on that. So I think that there's this whole piece around there are benefits. It's not just about shelling out money. They will really help you through the process. But for us, I mean, we've been certified 13 years. It is our kite mark of authenticity. You know, going back to that story I said at the beginning, I kept being sold organic products that had no organic ingredients at all present. And so, you know, we have got to build trust here. And until we're at a point where it's a legal requirement to be certified, you know, I would just encourage you, go out, get the certification. It'll help you. So that would be one of my first. I think if you're not quite there yet and you're thinking about getting certified, but you haven't made that step, but you're sourcing organic ingredients, please check the status of that certified ingredient. And you should always be challenging brands or suppliers about showing their organic certificate and their trading schedule. And to be clear, one does not come without the other. I have had even brands fudge this and show me a certificate, but not a trading schedule. The trading schedule is what gets updated after your audits, which are annual. You cannot have one without the other, but make sure you're not just being missold an organic product that's not. The other thing, and I think this is probably, I'm sure Cecilia will agree with this, and it might be a persistent theme in today, is about just be transparent and be honest. No consumer out there expects you to be 100% perfect. You're not going to get everything right, but start and do one thing well and do it, and maybe pick the thing you're passionate about. For me, it was organic. In terms of don'ts, and I think this might surprise some people, but generally speaking, if you intend to become certified organic, do not put organic in your brand name. because it is genuinely a very good indicator that you're not organic. I think, literally 99% of cases I can think of where organic is in the brand name, that company is nowhere near organic, because the whole point of that standard is that it's incredibly strict about that use of that word. And Pai, to put into context, 85% of our products are certified organic. The rest are certified natural by Cosmos. We wouldn't be able to call ourselves Pai Organic. It just gives you an indicator that it's so tightly controlled. Same for a product name. You can't put organic in unless you hit a high percentage, blah, 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 blah. So that's a thing. And then the final thing, again, goes back to if you're starting to list organic ingredients, but you're not yet certified, be very, very careful. And the big thing is, don't reference these certifying bodies, because that's passing off. And you see it a lot. They'll say certified by the Soil Association. If you're not a certified brand, you cannot do that. It is passing off, and you can fly under the radar, but when you get spotted, you will get walloped. So there would be my don'ts.
Definitely agree.
Specifics there, but I hope helpful.
No, but that's good. I'm sure there's a lot of brands on the line that want to hear those specifics, because it's I think it's certainly questions we've been asked a few times is on kind of certification for organic, and I couldn't agree more. I also think there's the benefit of being in that community where you're all kind of working together and helping grow that sector, I think is kind of underestimated often.
I think, just to add to that, completely that point, organic is not just about how that ingredient's grown. The broad ethical dimensions around organic are vast, and you might be really pleasantly surprised about having those values underpinning your brand and business. So to your point, it's a very positive ethical community.
Totally agree. I mean, just quickly extending on that, I think, becoming organic, as a product is complex. Have there been kind of sourcing challenges? And then on the kind of flip side, do you think shoppers are valuing the organic certification, enough compared to kind of the difficulty of sourcing those ingredients?
So the first question was around, is it hard to source? Honestly, no. And there are so many extraordinary certified organic ingredients you can use now in formulation, thousands and thousands. I think the big misnomer is if you did find an emerging new ingredient, an amazing active that is not yet certified organic, you can't buy it in a certified organic form, you can still use it. And that's the big thing that people don't understand. We use many that are not yet there because they're so new, and you can apply for derogation. The way it works, they have to check it's still biodegradable and not endangered and on GM and all of those things, but it doesn't stop you from producing an incredibly high performing product. So that would be the first question. The second one, what was your second question about?
Shoppers. How much do shoppers care about seeing that certification, and considering all the effort you put in? I
think from an effort and the sort of end-to-end piece, I think is opaque to the consumer, if I'm honest, and I'd love them to value it more, but they can't value something they don't understand or know. And we try very hard to explain it in simple terms, but it is really complex. And I think I'm very conscious I don't want to become this incredibly worthy, annoying, pious brand that sort of lectures. That's just not us. So I think it is quite hard. I think it's quite hard. I think it's a slow burn, actually.
Yeah, but I think awareness is certainly growing over
100%.
time. It was so niche in the beauty industry not that long ago, and I've been really surprised by how many brands are adopting it, and they're then in turn communicating to their customer base. But Cecilia, let's jump in and get practical. So how can brands ensure they're being clear and unambiguous, speaking to this principle, when it comes to marketing organic products or ingredients? What would be your top tips?
So, I think this is quite a tricky area, and we spent a lot of time discussing the word organic when we were preparing the guidance, because in relation to food, you have a very clear standard of what is expected in order to reach that, to be allowed to call that organic from a legal perspective, and there's no similar restriction on other areas. So I think Sarah's touched on some of the things that you can do, and certainly if you're going away and you're getting properly certified by a an independent third party, that's a really good way of making sure that you're not misleading consumers with that term. I think the other things that you need to do really around making sure that you're describing the ingredients properly, and then thinking about how and where you're using the word organic on the packaging. Completely accept or take Sarah's point about brand names as well, and brand names are caught by the term of environmental claims. So just because you slip something into your brand name doesn't mean you get away with using it if it's not true. So just sort of by way of an example, I mean, I'm a big fan of aloe vera gel, and I remember a few years ago buying a bottle of what was described on the front of the bottle as organic aloe vera gel. And it was only after, and I'm not this careless these days, but it was only after I got it home and looked at the back of it that I realized actually it did have organic aloe vera gel in it, but it had all of these other ingredients that I did not expect to be there based on the labeling. Now, if it had said on the front of the package, contains 50% organic aloe vera gel, I wouldn't have been misled. I probably wouldn't have bought the product. I wouldn't have been misled, and I would have known what I was getting. So I think the key thing is, if you're going to make claims like that, first of all, you need to make sure that you have a very high percentage of organic ingredients, because that's what consumers expect if you're using the word or applying the word organic generally to your product. And then of course, making sure that you are being clear if you are using the term organic in relation to one of your ingredients, that it only applies to that. I have a suspicion that most consumers don't turn over and look at the reverse side of a packet when they're buying products, whether that's food or beauty products. And as Sarah said, if you've got a long list of ingredients, most consumers won't know what they are anyway. So really making sure that the claims that you're making on the front are matched by the ingredients listing on the back.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think we've got to get that percentage right onto the front of the pack though, haven't we? Like, it's just so misleading to use that catch-all term if it's not a significant percentage. So yeah, I think that's a big watch out, but also for the shoppers on the line as well. Like, you know, I think we all now, any brand that's called organic something, I think we're absolutely all going to be checking those percentages. And if they're not listed, like, let's question those brands and make sure we find that out. Great, no, thanks. This is really, really helpful, and glad to see support for certification as well in this group. I think it's certainly one of the strongest ways, I think, to make sure you're being clear about the claims you're making. Perfect. Well, let's move on to the next principle. So we've got principle 2, which is claims must not omit information. Cecilia, tell us about this one in a nutshell.
Yeah, so this is the idea that what businesses don't say about their products can influence the decisions that consumers make. So businesses are required to provide customers with the information that they need to make those informed decisions. And the sorts of things we're talking about here, where claims focus on saying one thing but not another, or where they say nothing at all. Outside of the beauty world, one of the things that was in our mind when we were preparing this was the idea that certain products will fail to disclose the issues around the quality or the repairability of products. And particularly if you're dealing with products that can't be repaired in comparison to others, similar products which can, that's really important information. So that was sort of what was in our mind. Sorry, I'm about to be invaded by a cat here. So, I mean, I think the thing for beauty businesses is really to pay close attention to the environmental impacts that you're having and the information that consumers need to make decisions when you're making those claims. And if you think it's something that consumer would need to know to make an informed decision, then you should be disclosing it.
Yeah, no, totally agree. Well, let's look at how this principle applies to kind of one of the hot topics in sustainability in general, but we're certainly seeing it as a hot topic in beauty, which is recyclable packaging. So we know lots of brands are working hard to source recyclable materials for their packaging and are trying to also make sure that the end result is recyclable as well. But we're also seeing a lot of struggles to communicate that to customers. But, you know, beauty industry's got some of the most complex packaging I think I've ever seen, and sometimes it's a bit of a puzzle to work out like how to recycle what bits. So I think this is a great topic to kind of explore this principle. So I'm sure we've got a lot of brands on the line that have invested in trying to enable more recyclability of their packaging. But yeah, let's dig into kind of how they can tell their customers about it without greenwashing, because it's certainly not simple for this area. Maybe Sarah, let's start with you. Love to hear a bit about any packaging innovations that you've done at Pai, and kind of, yeah, how have you approached communicating them so as, you know, not to confuse shoppers?
So we last September we looked at every single pack in our entire range, and as part of a rebrand, I mean, it was driven a lot by sustainability, other stuff too, but sustainability was a big driver because we'd reached a point where we did a lot right, but the whole packaging industry had moved forward in a huge leap, and there was just so much more choice. And we said, okay, we need to constantly evolve. But this is our moment. So we looked at every single one, and where we felt we could improve, we would. To your point though, beauty packaging, lots of componentry, and some bits are not recyclable, some are. It's very difficult. So again, this is making a start, and that's okay. But again, to Cecilia's point, be honest about your shortcomings. Don't hide them. So we did a lot. So very quickly, and I'll fly through it. Secondary packaging. So that's the box. Mm-hmm. We've never used laminates. I think it's a curse of our industry, because if you laminate a box, and often they are, because otherwise they get dirty on shelf. Laminates make it very hard to honorably recycle. We've never used laminates. Well, not for, I don't know, 7 years, but our new packs, right. No laminate, made for 50%. Recycled board and 50% FSC board, biodegradable tamper seals. This is a patent pending box. So I
was going to say that the inside of that box is super cool, like the way it dovetails to hold the product. I was pretty impressed.
We wanted to remove all adhesives and leaflets, because you know those leaflets you get in boxes, in beauty products, they're this big and they unravel, and no one ever reads them because it's just legislative, you know, in 13 languages. We just said, okay, we'll put it all in the box. And so you open it up, and there's a lot of legislative regulatory stuff, but also lots of storytelling. So that was on the secondary. Primary, 50% of our packaging is glass, the other 50% tubes, and of those tubes, they are up to 57% PCR, with the rest coming from bio-based plastics. So sugarcane, we managed to reduce our plastics down, virgin plastic use by 58%.
Oh, fantastic.
Lots. So, but it's just the beginning, right? Because it's changing all the time. What I would say is that the sorts of more bio-based plastics are hard to recycle as well. And the biggest challenge is we've got no universal curbside recycling within the UK, let alone market to market to market. So it makes it very difficult. What we did, and I think the communication piece is the bit we still struggle on, because we do this great stuff. We really struggle to explain it. And I think of a lot of the questions we have around sustainability coming in from our consumers, a lot is around recyclability. Even though we put a lot of information out there, they don't necessarily see it. So we did a full recycling guide. So you can go on our website, and it shows how each bottle you can disassemble, which bits are recyclable from your curbside, we think, but then we give you links to where you might be able to check. And then anything you're not sure about, you can send back to us, or we encourage you. So we linked with our retail partners to say where they had TerraCycle or equivalent schemes, we sent people into store to say that's the better place to go because it's local, rather than sending it back. But last resort would be send it back, and we will take it all apart and make sure that it's specialistly recycled. And yeah, so that's how we did it. But it's, you know, work in progress. And there's areas we still need to look at, but we just, I think for a lot of people, and particularly in the organic space, because obviously we use preservatives, but they may be not as strong as other preservatives. You have to maintain the integrity of the product. So it's this balancing act of, we use a lot of airless technology. So it's this balancing act of integrity of the product, integrity for the planet, and
Yeah.
it's a constantly kind of.
No, absolutely. No, and it's a challenge we've seen across many brands, and I think every brand is on this journey to try and get to the most sustainable packaging solution they can. Actually, something we've been working on at Provenance on this is actually a way directly from the e-commerce site or from Pack, from a QR code, to be able to look up how to recycle the product in your exact postcode, because we saw this exact problem. So people kind of needing to know how to recycle it, but they need to know how to recycle it right there in their borough. So we're actually going to be launching that quite soon with a few brands, so that we can actually start to empower the consumer to understand right then and there, like if they can recycle it in their area, either pre-purchase or post. So it's certainly an issue we've seen again and again. But Cecilia, let's go back to the principle, and I'd love to know kind of when it comes to recyclability, particularly looking at things like packaging, kind of what kind of information are kind of brands kind of commonly leaving out? Where might they get caught out on this?
So I mean, I think we've touched on a lot of the areas already, and that issue about the sort of the differential approaches in different local authorities is a really challenging one. We know that. And different local authorities taking different approaches and recycling different products. Soft plastics is a very good example of that, where some local authorities will do it, some won't. It's all technically recyclable, but it's very difficult for a customer to figure out where to do that. So I mean, that's one of the things, and obviously it's difficult when you're creating a product to have information about everybody's individual postcode, but I think looking at some of the sort of best standards that are out there, things like RAP, which the organization RAP, which has its own standard for how to label recycling, is a good place to start for information and to find out how you can best do it. The approach that Sarah's described there of trying to provide information to consumers to point them in the right direction is a good one. And Sarah touched on the other big issues where you've got products with lots of different components and all require something slightly different. Brands will often not give information beyond recycle, and they won't tell you how to do that. And it's particularly problematic if you've got a mix of recyclable and non-recyclable materials in the same item, but it's equally problematic if some can be recycled in your curbside and others requires different treatment. And it's just about giving customers that information so that they know what to do with it, and so they can make informed decisions about whether or not to buy that product or whether to go for something that they can deal with more easily.
Yeah, no, totally agree. It's one of my biggest pet peeves, I think, is when you see recyclable packaging and then you dig into it, it's like, oh, okay, the main body of the thing's recyclable, but like nothing else is. Like it kind of goes back to that percentage point again, right? You need to be like really clear, like what you're talking about when it comes to this stuff. I guess also to flag to the brands on the line is the extended producer responsibility legislation that's coming into force in 2023. So even if the Green Claims Code hasn't got you on this, it's that will mandate that all packaging has to be clearly and consistently labelled. So it's really important to kind of get ahead of this because there's lots of stuff coming up. And I guess just quickly on this point, I mean, we're going to talk a bit about kind of the net zero craze in a second, but I've also been hearing a lot of zero waste products, or this is zero waste. Sarah, is this possible or is this ridiculous?
Well, I think it depends on your definition a little, because I mean, we're a manufacturer, so for us, I look at the whole piece and I think, can anything be zero waste if you consider the inputs into the product, not just the end of life piece? Because there's always waste, and I think we do a lot around wastewater, and we have an amazing closed loop system, but there's still wastewater and there's still waste always in manufacturing. So if you consider that, probably not. I think if you talk about zero landfill, yes, you can. The examples I could muster coming onto this call was soap, because soap, obviously it's just a bar of soap and then it's gone. And if provided it's packaged in, say, a compostable paper or whatever, that would be as close as I think you could get. The example I would use in food would be Riverford. I think partly because they've got the infrastructure to do it, but they're very good at also the kind of education piece of what can be recycled and how, and anything they can't, they'll pick up. So I think food is a bit further ahead. Beauty is because of that complex packaging and dispense of a product. It's harder. Refillable is quite interesting, but again, the refillable has to be the bit that's refilling. What that's coming has to be zero waste. So I think wild deodorants is quite interesting because they have a little pod you put in that is compostable, and then of course you use what's in there. You've got a big clunky plastic thing, but at least that's forever, hopefully. So I think it's possible in minority of cases, I'd say.
Yeah, no, agree. I'm quite liking the refillable trend. There's some really gorgeous design that's been coming out. I noticed Heckles as well has done a refillable deodorant, gorgeously designed package. So I think that's an interesting one coming through. But yeah, as you say, you can't ignore all the waste that happened in the supply chain pre that moment of you buying it. So I think I mean my take on this, you have to be very, very careful with making those kinds of claims, which brings us on pretty neatly actually to our third principle, which is all about looking at the whole life cycle of the product. Just quickly to flag to everyone, thank you so much for joining us today, but just wondered if you've got any questions or if there's anything that we're not covering in this session so far, do please drop them in the chat. We welcome all kinds of questions on the Green Claims Code, or if you've got general questions, you've got Sarah and Cecilia here to answer anything that you might be crossing your mind. So do drop them in the chat. We'll also be sharing some links and stuff as we go, so you've got some things to read after this session. But let's dig into the final principle. So claims must consider the whole life cycle. Cecilia, give us the lowdown on this one.
Yeah, so this really goes back to the idea that any claims that you're making need to be truthful and accurate. I would start by saying, first of all, if you've actually managed to reduce your carbon emissions, well done. And it's definitely okay to tell customers about that. What we're not saying with the requirement to consider the full life cycle is that you don't have to go out and do a full life cycle analysis. You don't have to give a carbon footprint to your customers, although there are various initiatives coming down the line where that might become mandatory at some point, for some products at least. But I think the key thing is that, and it definitely does go back to what we were just talking about, is this idea that you can't, or you might still be misleading customers by giving them a piece of information about one aspect of your life cycle that's positive, if you are deliberately ignoring, or if you're ignoring detrimental things that are happening elsewhere in the life cycle. So I was looking for some good examples of this, and I came across a website the other day for a paper product which explained where they sourced the material from, what they did to keep carbon emissions low in the transport of the product, how that compared to similar products, the customers, more traditional products that customers might be buying in that space. And there was a really clear explanation for people to understand on the website. So actually that made it quite easy to trust what was being said. But on the other hand, you can find products where they'll focus on one very narrow part of the supply chain. They might say, for example, we source all our ingredients locally to reduce carbon emissions. But actually what they're not saying is, yes, we source them locally, but the people we're buying them from, they've transported them halfway around the world, or halfway across Europe in a lorry. So really what we're saying about considering the full life cycle here is just make sure that you're not misleading customers by focusing on one narrow element of what you're doing well, while ignoring all of the other things that you're not doing so well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think this is one of the trickier ones as well. So we're going to try and relate this specifically to carbon, particularly in the run up to COP26, which is, a sheer matter of weeks away. We've seen lots of brands making net zero pledges, which is fantastic, and we do need brands to commit to reducing and carbon in their supply chain and in their kind of direct operations. But it's also increasingly important that brands communicate that too. And actually we've seen, yeah, I guess a starting to be the beginning of a trend maybe of brands looking at putting carbon footprint information on pack. We've seen a few brands be called out for this already, like not doing it quite correctly. So it's certainly an emerging area. So we are seeing lots of brands working with consultancies or software tools to help them kind of measure and reduce carbon emissions. But I guess the key thing is, you know, should brands start to share this progress with shoppers? And I guess, yeah, where maybe Cecilia, starting with you, like, have you seen anyone that's really done that super well? And like, what are the elements of that? And then I guess I would also love to hear about what maybe a bad example might look like if you were sharing carbon progress as a brand.
So, I mean, I can't probably name any specific people that I've seen doing it terribly well, but over the course of our investigation, we've seen some really interesting tools emerging with people using things like a traffic light system to indicate the sort of carbon impact of a product. There's some really good work going on in Europe at the moment with product carbon footprints, which will standardize for a whole series of different products, standardize the methodology used to calculate the carbon footprint, and then convey that to consumers in a way that will then be comparable between products within the same category. I think, I mean, honestly, it's a challenge to give consumers that information, and it's a challenge for consumers to understand it, even if the information given is accurate. And I think this is a space where we're going to have to just wait and see a little bit and see what innovation emerges. Because I mean, certainly from a consumer protection perspective, we don't want to be stifling innovation. But actually, the most important thing for us is that consumers get the information they need in a way that they can understand. And so I think we're going to need to see a lot more testing. You know, we'll have to get the behavioral psychologists and the behavioral scientists onto this to see really how our consumers taking in this information. Just to give an example of it, so we've had food traffic light system for quite a long time now, but actually it's taken decades really for you know, consumers to start to be able to understand properly the nutritional information they're given on packets. So I do think that there's probably quite a long lead time here to get from a position where we are telling people about the carbon footprint of a product and having that allow them to make an informed decision to reduce the impact that they're having.
Definitely. Yeah, no, I agree. I think we've only just got our head around sugar and salt, and now we've got to get our head around like carbon as well. No, totally agree. Sarah, is this something you guys have considered, measuring your carbon footprint, putting it on pack?
We've considered it. I agree with everything that Cecilia said, because and from where I stand, you know, we don't, because we feel it would be misleading, because in our world, it would be a moving target, because and also because being a manufacturer, with help with some tools, we could probably work out the sort of carbon impacts of a single product up to the point it leaves our factory. But a big part of the carbon, you know, sort of impact is what happens next in the distribution of products. And I think for us, you know, we, you know, send our products to different retailers in different markets, and so the carbon sort of imprint will be completely different depending on when that consumer gets it and in what country and how it's got there. And I think we have no control, particularly on the wholesale piece of, you know, are our retailers transferring them from warehouses in a big diesel truck? Like, we don't know. So I think so that's why we don't, because we just think we couldn't do it in a way that we felt was fully transparent, and didn't feel we could do it confidently. So what we're doing more is just looking at the carbon. We're in carbon reduction mode to just say, okay, how can we do it? And one of the areas we feel, I mean, obviously we've got a slight head start because we make our own products and there's lots we can do there, but for us, it's where we're focusing first is logistics and looking at where we can have a carbon neutral delivery service for our D2C business. And that's really getting quite developed now. We're quite far along with that. So yeah, that would be my take.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and that's it's good to hear, and I think hopefully all beauty brands that are on this session are in reduction mode as well, and I think there's a lot to do there. First of all, I'm just going to actually weave in a quick question from the audience because it relates specifically to this, which is, if making a specific claim, do we still have to do a full life cycle analysis of the product? That could have quite a big impact and stop brands to do the step-by-step improvements because they may not be able to claim them. So also full life cycle assessments require a big budget. I think, Cecilia, you already mentioned this, but maybe just to clarify for this question that's just come in.
Yeah, so certainly from a legal perspective, there's no obligation to do that full life cycle assessment. I think what we tried to convey with the principle that you should consider the full life cycle is that piece about are you making a claim about your product that is undermined by things that are happening elsewhere in the supply chain or elsewhere in the life cycle of the product. So what we would normally be saying is, in those circumstances, then you should make clear where what you're claiming is kind of restricted to a part of the life cycle. I can't think of an example in the sort of the beauty world, but one thing we've seen, for example, is with electric vehicles, where claims are made about electric vehicles being zero emission. The key thing with that is being clear that it's zero emission when they're being driven, because of course, if you've got them plugged in, they may be creating emissions. When they're built at the factory, they're creating emissions. So it's about making clear where that's where the claim you're making is limited to a specific part of the life cycle, but also having in mind the possibility that in itself, picking out that one small matter, might mislead consumers about what's happening elsewhere. So it's a tricky balance, but it's sort of getting the balance right so that consumers understand what's actually happening.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are two key things I'm seeing there. So another one is, I guess it's quite important maybe to tie in another green claims principle here, which is about claims must be substantiated. And I think increasingly for things like carbon, like making sure you are open with how you've calculated that and you're making that very clear, because it's it's a slightly more, I guess, subjective measurement in lots of ways. I guess the other thing to just dig into is, I guess we're talking about a lot of impact information here now. Some things are quite, maybe relatively simple to communicate, particularly if you've got a certification. So you can just say, I'm organic, Soil Association certified. But with something like carbon, there are lots of different ways you could kind of move and improve carbon. Cecilia, if you could hear a little bit more kind of how do you think brands can realistically share this stuff with shoppers? It's a lot to share, right?
Yes, absolutely. And again, there's a sort of a risk of overwhelming consumers with the information, and then they just disengage from the process. So, I mean, I think again, I say we are starting to see these different shorthand ways of communicating the information with people using traffic light systems or sustainability scores, for example, are being trialed in the fashion sector, for example. But I mean, one of the things businesses can do if they're making claims or if they want to convey more information to consumers than they have the pack space for or the leaflet space for, then using technology, using things like QR codes or making websites available where customers can go and they can read the information that backs up what you're saying. It's really important to say, though, for businesses, if you choose to go down that route, whatever you say to the consumer up front has to be backed up by what's in the information you provide behind the scenes. So what would not be acceptable from a consumer protection law perspective would be to make a claim about being carbon neutral, for example, but then to have a lot of qualifications hidden away on a website or behind a QR code, because that sort of undermines the original claim. So really it's about making sure that yes, you can make a very high level claim, you can link consumers to the information, but that information has to back up the high level claim that you've made.
Got it. Perfect. Thanks so much. Conscious of time, and thank you all so much. This has been such a good discussion. I've tried to weave in a few questions as we've gone from the audience as well. Apologies if we don't get a chance to answer your specific question. We will follow up after this with more kind of links and info. So don't worry too much about that. just wanted to kind of wrap up and give a bit of a conclusion, because this is I feel like we've only just started to scratch the surface on this topic, really. And yeah, I guess a rallying call for everyone on the webinar. Like, we know greenwash is the enemy of progress, and we absolutely have to rally together to build up the industry, make sure we're all doing better. But it's a daunting area, and we know there are the pitfalls and nuances. And so, yeah, I'd invite everyone on the call, like, if you've got further questions, if you want to dig into this topic in more detail, this is our first webinar at Provenance on beauty, but we will certainly be doing more, and also bringing together smaller groups that want to have discussions. So please do reach out and connect with us if you'd like to have a discussion on this topic further. But I'd just like, before we wrap up, to just invite each speaker to just give a bit of a final call, final word, particularly for brands that might just be getting started on this journey. So Sarah, do you want to start off?
I think I would say evidence. So pick what you feel passionate about and what you want to start with, and just substantiate what you're saying. Be honest and transparent. I think we've seen time and time again a very forgiving consumer. If you're honest, they just want to trust you, and are very forgiving, as I say, and have been for us many times. Start somewhere. You don't have. I think the other thing, I think to your point, it's so daunting, and people, there's so much to think about. You don't have to do it all at once. And we've been going 13 years. This hasn't happened overnight, and we've got masses still to do. So that's okay. But the main thing I would say is it has to be led from the top in your organizations. That it's just never going to fly, and you've got to kind of make sure that you're living and breathing it and embedding it as a kind of, lighthouse in your organization that people can navigate to. Because if you're not, you've got to own it.
Totally agree. Thank you. Cecilia, final word.
I think Sarah said a lot of the things I would say about making sure that you start with the evidence and go from there. I think what's really key here is that, consumers want to be buying the right products. They want to buy products that are good for the environment, or at least not bad for the environment. That's where they want to spend their money. But I think there's a risk that the trust in these products is fragile, or trust in the claims about the environment is fragile. And so it's really, really important that businesses are honest, are telling the truth, as Sarah said, admitting what they're doing well, or admitting what they're not doing well is what they are doing well. Because otherwise, I think we risk just a complete collapse in trust in products that are trying to meet the demand of consumers. And if that happens, it's an existential threat to businesses, but it's also damaging the efforts that everybody are trying to undertake to get consumers to shop more sustainably, and that's just not good for any of us.
Totally. It's a group endeavor. I think rise a community of brands that are humble, honest, want to drive real progress, because after all, many of you are working for brands, and the reality is we've got a long way to go in order to really enable a future where products are a force for good. So thank you so much, Cecilia, Sarah, for joining me today. Really loved the session. As I mentioned, any other questions we didn't pick up, we'll try and field them to these guys to get some answers back to you all. And we've also shared a few links in the chat. So grab a cup of tea, make sure you give the Green Claims Guide a proper read, and also a few other resources from Provenance team as well, for those of you that have got more to learn. But thank you all so much for joining us today, and we'll see you guys soon. Thanks everyone. Bye bye.